My name is Wendy Patrick, and we are talking about courtroom homeostasis. We are speaking to some of our colleagues that have a lot of experience in courtrooms and different types of trials and different kinds of hearings, and are going to be sharing a little bit of their experiences and how what they heard in a courtroom stayed with them, not always in a positive sense, which is important for us moving forward as we work through some of the ways in which we can ensure that we have a healthy professional life and then also keep a healthy personal life.
Hi, Rosalie. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for.
Could you tell us what was your role in the courtroom, and did you find it particularly challenging?
Okay, so I went right out of high school basically into court reporting school and became a court reporter at 21. I went into the courtroom and as a novice and someone who really didn't have a lot of experience as criminals. And within 2 months, I knew I had to get out of that setting because I had sat in on a criminal trial, a rape trial, and then a murder trial. And I kept crying. I was very empathetic with the witness, with the person talking about particularly a rape. And I was trying to hide my crying because there's a jury there, and I know the court reporter can't be crying or show any type of emotion. And it really was incredibly stressful. And I had no tools, I had no idea how to deal with these emotions just coming up and this feeling of empathy. So within 2 months, I went and talked to the person, the manager, and said, I need to not be doing criminal. Therefore, I moved over into the world of depositions and freelance. So I guess I kind of jumped a little bit, but as far as my role, basically, is just taking down every word that's said in a courtroom.
You're very famous in the court reporting world, and you're very good at what you do, and your firm was very successful, and you and I have known each other for a number of years, and you're always in such a great mood. It is interesting to me that it was so different sitting and listening in a courtroom, and I have to ask, what types of cases in the criminal realm did you find more traumatic to listen to? Or maybe I should say the most traumatic to listen to, and why?
Well, and I'm going to be really honest here too. The one that sticks out in my mind, it was a rape case. And on the stand was a woman who had been raped, and she was talking about the experience. And I really had never even thought about these kind of things. I lived a very sheltered life growing up. So when this woman was talking, I just started feeling so much for her. And it really made me sad. I'm just going to be really honest, because when everybody was outside of the courtroom, other than myself, the bailiff, and the judge, they kind of made fun of her. And I was a 21-year-old, and it just hurt my heart that they would do that. And I knew she was very sincere with everything she had said and was feeling and going through. And then the rapist, supposedly, that's what he did, was sitting right there smirking. And that whole feeling in that courtroom was so toxic to me that I just, I would go home shaking.
Wow.
So that's why I just had to get out of that world.
During the time that you were in that world listening to criminal trials, did it get easier over time, harder over time, or was it always the same amount of trauma or did it depend on the fact pattern in the case that you were reporting?
Well, the other type of cases that would really bother me would be some family law and anything to do with children, anyone being mean to children. And so getting older, I had to learn how to deal with this. So I started trying to figure out ways that I could force myself not to at least show emotion. And as a court reporter, obviously you're taking down words and there's a lot of focus, mental focus. So what I would do is just start thinking about the words and not about the emotion behind the words, and how to write the words and breaking apart the words. Or I would take myself out of that situation and pretend, let's say it's a sunny day, I'm going to pretend I'm sailing right now. I'm going to pretend I'm on the bay in San Diego and try to trick, because there's no one to teach me how to deal with this. And some court reporters, I asked some of the older court reporters how they dealt with it. And they said, oh, it just doesn't bother me. It bothers some people. It doesn't bother other people. So I guess you must be one of the people that it bothers. but there was no answer as to what to do about it. But with age and learning these little tricks of not being there, just taking myself out of that setting and pretending I wasn't there, or just focusing on the words, was the only way really I could deal with all that emotion coming at me.
You've kind of given us a little bit of an insight, but what advice would you give to others that spend a majority of their time in the courtroom, possibly listening to these very sort of traumatic and seeing graphic artifacts and photos on how to sort of manage those feelings that come up when they're exposed to these type of events?
Well, I can only speak from a court reporter's perspective. And as you know, or I can imagine, as a court reporter, you really are focused. I mean, you're having to get every single word. And so what I tell court reporters, young court reporters, is to take themselves out. What we're able to do, just to get through school and to be able to write so fast, 250 words plus a minute, is you're able to take your mind and go to a different place. I call it WA. I give it a name and try to describe it to other young reporters. And so you're able to just blank out and even not be there and just let the words flow through you without thinking. And so that's one way that I've learned how to deal with it. Another thing that's come up in the past is just with the attorneys fighting, particularly in a deposition, because there's no judge to control the attorneys. And when they're fighting and yelling and wanting to actually beat each other up, they stand up and you're in the middle as the court reporter. And then sometimes they'll take that anger and channel it at the reporter and start yelling, read it back. No, don't read it back. Read it back. Why aren't you reading it back? And the court reporter's sitting there and they don't know how to deal with it either. So what I've learned to do there is just to take myself into the shoes of those attorneys. And I tell this to the young reporters, they're acting. A lot of this, what's going on in this setting, is acting. They're all pretending. At lunch, they're probably going to go have a beer. I've seen it happen. And it was shocking to me. But once I understood that a lot of what happens in a courtroom is acting, pretend, drama being created by the participants, it really made it a lot easier to deal with the fact that it's not real.
Rosalie, has there ever been a time when you've been working in the courtroom where during the court proceedings that you actually feared for your own safety?
Yes. A couple of times. Once it was a gang member, and they take the shackles off, and just the way he was looking, and actually in a deposition, the attorneys were coming to fisticuffs, and were coming at each other, and then one of them picked up my machine, like they're going to throw it. It didn't happen. But there's that feeling that's just fear that what can happen. And actually one thing I do too, when my brain is, when I'm trying to escape from the reality, is I do pretend, like, what would happen right now? How would I survive if someone came in right now with a gun? What are my actions? And so I think, okay, I'm going to go down under the table. I'm going to go put my machine up here. So I play act almost, how to survive in these type of situations.
So you were aware of some of the dangers that could be present, and you had sort of prepared mentally that should something happen, that you were going to take action, sort of.
Right. That's kind of my personality, is not to wait and sit, but to be ready for everything. My dad taught me to survive. And so I do go into survival mode sometimes when I'm in certain settings.
Rosalie, after a particularly trying day in the courtroom, emotionally, what are some of the ways in which you would unwind at the end of the day, sort of to try to restore some of that balance in your life after what you've had to witness and listen to and report on throughout the course of a very difficult day?
Well, Wendy, like you said, my nature's happy. That's who I like to be and who I'm most comfortable being. So there are a couple of things that I would do. One, I used to talk to my husband, but he asked me to stop talking to him. Being honest again, he's really sweet, but after a while he said, can you just go take a bath or do something? Because I don't want to worry with you. And so one thing I do is sports. I play soccer, I run, I walk the dog. The third thing I started doing it. I think it was the most beneficial. And I started in 2006. I started blogging to other court reporters, just giving advice, like what I would do and how I truly feel. And these are some tricks that maybe they won't help you, but they help me. And I try to describe them, for instance, the pretending, the wall. And that was so well received by court reporters all over the country. People were taking my blogs and using them in newsletters and the national journal, because I think that a lot of us go through a lot of these things. And if I am able to help someone else, it really helps me figure out, plus writing helps me understand more what it is that's triggering all these emotions and feelings. So those are a couple of the things that I've done or I do, particularly after an upsetting day in the courtroom.
Working in the courtroom every day, obviously, you would have had regular colleagues to whom you know, whether they were bailiffs, whether they were other court clerks or reporters. And in all of your experiences and in all of your interactions with these other colleagues who also work in the courtroom, do you recall anybody ever talking about the stress and the trauma that they were exposed to and that they had to experience in their work there?
Right. Like I said, some people just stayed away from criminal and went into civil if they had that option. And other people will not refuse to step into family law courtrooms because it's too upsetting for them. So as far as what other people do, bailiffs, clerks, sometimes there is a camaraderie and you can talk to each other and get comfort and all agree this is horrible, and to talk it out a little bit with someone who's been in the same situation as you in that courtroom. But as far as court reporters, we are a kind of we're in our own world because we're always working on transcripts or writing, or we have to go in our little office and write on transcripts and fix and clean. So we don't really have a lot of camaraderie. And the thing is too, and I'll just say this, when I was very young in those criminal situations, I was at a conference and a person approached me and said, you should see a psychiatrist because you can't even do any criminal work. You can't even work in a courtroom. Maybe someone could get rid of some of that empathy or whatever it is. And I thought, I don't want to lose my empathy. I like that part of my personality. So I guess I just am not the kind of person that's able to do that type of work. So I'll shift over here and go into civil, and or I'll just play my mind games and pretend I'm not in those situations that really upset me.
And when you went into this field, I'm sure that there's some courses of education that were required. But in your education, what were you taught about how to deal with this stress and trauma that you would incur in your occupation?
0.0. No one talked about that. That was not important in the schooling to become a court reporter, or even going into court when you're doing your apprenticeship.
And did you observe others to whom you worked with that were in the courtroom environment where you could see obviously certain cases or certain parts of evidence affected them dramatically? And what did you think about that when you saw those people?
Well, I feel like because they were so upset, it would upset me just talking about it. So I thought, I'm just the wrong person. You can't talk to me. The most famous court reporters that I know were the O.J. Simpson court reporters. And they were like our rock stars. So we did some interviewing of them and how they dealt with it and how they deal with it. And for them, they were able to just shut their minds, just do what I was talking about earlier, and just to disappear from being in that room, because that's all they did was death penalty, courtroom, criminal, heinous type of work. But there really isn't anybody that gives you a lot of advice on how to deal with it. Either you deal with it or you get out.
So I understand that you weren't given any education or training on how to deal with that stress and trauma that you're occurring on a daily basis. But can you tell me what type of resources did your employer make available to you to help you deal with these sort of things?
And now when I want to be fair to the employer, I don't know that I asked for resources. I just got out. Um, I never even thought of that there might be a resource or someone to talk to or to help deal with this. So,
I think it's really important, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. But I think it's really important to understand that, that when people are exposed to on the daily this type of information, this type of telling of the cases and testimony and witnesses, this is going to have an effect on the human body, on the physical body, on the psychological body, and on the emotional body. And it doesn't matter how many years a person's been doing this, how tough and stoic they think they are. It's going to affect them. And many people who begin to feel these sort of effects, for some reason, they think that they're broken. They think that there's something wrong with them, because my colleague, same thing, listening to the same thing every day. Why isn't it affecting them? And it's really, really important to understand that when we feel these things, when things make us sort of uncomfortable, and in your particular case, you made the decision to withdraw for that particular environment, that is a survival instinct. That is something that is protecting us, in saying that we recognize how this environment is making us feel. And that really was self-preservation, the decision that you made to remove yourself from the criminal system and choose to work in a different environment. I think you should be commended for that.
but thank you for saying that, because actually I always thought there was not something wrong with me, but I'm too empathetic. There's something wrong. Well, something wrong with me that I couldn't deal with it.
Well, that's like saying that you're too much of a human being, that you should be less of a human being, which really was what some of your colleagues were trying to suggest to you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. It makes me feel better, because it actually has not haunted me, but it's been in the back of my mind. And I'm 60 now. That was when I was 21.
So many of us, we all have a ability to sort of carry trauma, carry stress, and not deal with it. But we do have a limited capacity. Now, some people have larger capacities than others, but when we reach that capacity, it doesn't matter who we are, it doesn't matter the experience that we have or how much training we've had. Our body is going to basically put a check engine light on. It's going to say, whoa, like there's something wrong. And just like when the check engine light comes on in the car, it's time to identify something needs some attention, and we need to take it to the place to get it fixed. And really, that's what happens with so many people. However, as we know, so many people will continue to drive that car for miles and miles and miles and just ignore that check engine light. And when a human being does that, it can be quite devastating and life-changing.
Even worse than that, some people know how to manipulate their car's mechanics to turn the light off.
That's
So,
right.
what have they done? They have learned to self medicate themselves. They've learned how to find ways to ignore the reality that they need a break. And it sounds like, Rosalie, there were some people that were sharing their experiences and how they believe they were able to remove themselves emotionally from what they were reporting. But I'm sure that experts like Robert would say that's impossible to somehow inoculate yourself from feeling, from listening, from hearing. It all is going in, whether it's repressed or not. It seems like nowadays what we're seeing, and this is a blessing, is there seems to be more of an emphasis on wellness and more of an interest in talking, like you're blogging, in talking instead of repressing. And that can only lead to people being able to at least function better if they have to, if they choose to. Many people would do exactly the same thing that you did for the same reasons, which are commendable, by the way. But at the very least, it's great to hear these raw experiences that you're sharing, because I guarantee you, people that will be listening will be saying, I felt the same way and I did the same thing. Or I wish I would have done the same thing that you did.
Absolutely, Wendy. There is no such thing as inoculation to stress and trauma. Really, there is a debt that's incurred by the human body when we're exposed to stress and trauma. And so really it just becomes when we're going to pay the debt, and how much principal and how much interest. And so, if we have a mechanism to help process trauma and stress that we deal with on a daily basis, generally we're paying a small amount of principal, and a very little amount of interest. But when we choose to repress those experiences and we wait weeks, months, sometimes years, sometimes decades, the amount of interest that has accrued, that when it comes time to pay the piper, is astronomical, both in time and resources. And that's why it's so important for people to understand that these are debts that need to be paid quite quickly in order for our own mental and physiological health. Hi, Rosalie. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate both of you talking to me, to be honest.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for the gracious gift of your time, especially on a Friday afternoon. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you both. And I love what you're doing. It's important, you know? So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.